Welcome to the Lost in Transition podcast. I am your host, Chris Gerard. Lana Burrell joining me here in a few moments as well. Glad to have you along, and welcome to a lot of new listeners coming in off of some of the most recent episodes. A lot of great recommendations that we've had lately that we've been able to get on the program. We love it when you let us know who you'd like to hear from. Ironman world record holder Tim Don about a month ago here. Great talking to him. Jesse Thomas and his scholarship recipients in their first year of pro triathlon. A lot of fun getting to know Jesse, as well as athletes Allison Linnell, Alyssa Dela, and Tony Smorgowitz. That's a cool episode. You can go back and listen to it if you haven't caught it already. And then information, always loved listening to Matt Fitzgerald, and we talked specifically about his 2013 book, Racing Weight, and a little bit about his most recent book as well. You can go back and check that out at losttransition.com, or subscribe so you don't miss a show. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast, we should be there. If we're not somewhere that you would like us to be, just let us know. The TuneIn Radio app and YouTube also hosting some podcasts for us there. Facebook and Twitter at Lost Transitions, our Twitter handle, and Facebook page is the Lost in Transition Triathlon Podcast. Connect with us there. It's a great place to let us know what you'd like to hear on upcoming shows. And thanks to listener Adam Arkins for the recommendation for today's guest, David Watkins of the IronHeart Foundation. David is a survivor of a harrowing 17-hour open heart surgery during which he flatlined for 5 minutes. 13 months later, he was on the Ironman starting line. His foundation helps athletes with cardiac issues all over the U.S. and the world reach their fullest potential. And he shared some of the stories of those athletes in the documentary Heart, Flatline to Finish Line that released last year. Very much worth watching, and we'll tell you where you can stream that or buy that a little bit later on in the show. I know you'll enjoy hearing his story. Stay tuned. David Watkins is next on the Lost in Transition podcast. David Watkins is the founder of the IronHeart Foundation, a not-for-profit that helps people with heart disease live a healthy, heart-smart, and active life. He survived a 17-hour open heart surgery brought on by a congenital heart defect. During the operation, he flatlined and was without a functioning heartbeat for 5 minutes. In addition to running the foundation, Dave also directed the 2016 documentary Heart, Flatline to Finish Line that follows the story of 6 people with heart disease from the hospital bed to the Ironman finish line. David Watkins, welcome to Lost in Transition.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your diagnosis, how you found out, what procedures you had to undergo, and what the prognosis was for living a healthy life, let alone doing an Ironman.
Yeah, good question. So I've been active my whole life. I played football and baseball all through college. Finished up, met my wife, and she looked at me and said, we have to change what being in shape means to you. So she got me running. I was a pretty big guy at the time, and I got hooked. And running led to adventure races led to triathlon. And triathlon eventually led me to a race here local in Seattle called the Seaford Triathlon, where I ended up collapsing at the finish line. And kind of a long story behind how that happened, but at the end, everybody kind of ruled it out as dehydration, poor nutrition, overexertion, heat exhaustion. It was pretty hot that day. All the typical things that you would hear. And I went kind of limping on my way back home with my wife, basically saying, you're going in. That was not normal. And I went kicking and screaming into my doctor, really healthy guy at the time, and feeling really good. And they did an EKG, and that led immediately to me heading over to see a cardiologist because something looked a little abnormal. And the cardiologist noticed that I had what's called a bicuspid aortic valve. And a bicuspid aortic valve, your aortic valve is basically the valve. It looks supposed to look like a Mercedes symbol. Well, mine didn't have that third little leg on it. So basically, the opening and closing of my aorta was working double time because it wasn't given the space to open as a normal valve would. It had only 2 leaflets instead of 3. So it looked okay, but that's when the congenital defect was first diagnosed. But the doctor at the time basically said, well, the collapsing, we don't know why. That could be all those reasons that you were told. So I continue on training, and these events start happening more frequently. And it wasn't just around exercise. I could go and run 15 miles, not have a problem, or I could go and run to the end of my driveway and go into a funky rhythm, which I called them whiteouts, which eventually led me to, basically laying down flat on my back, trying to get my composure again. They were scary, no doubt. So I kept going to cardiologist after cardiologist after cardiologist. And out of frustration, finally went back to my primary care doc, who said, we need to get you in with somebody who might really understand what's going on. My biggest frustration was I'd be going into a cardiologist office as a guy in my young 30s, in shape, healthy, and I'd be sitting around with an older population, maybe that had been smoking or been fairly sedentary their whole life, or just people in general who are quite sedentary in their lifestyles. And the general cardiologist would look at me and say, well, you're an anomaly. We don't really know what to do with you. We don't treat triathletes. We don't treat endurance athletes. And we certainly don't know with your congenital defect what to say or what to do here. So I finally got to the University of Washington Medical Center here in Seattle, where they looked at me and did another run of tests and realized that not only did I have a bicuspid valve, but by that time an aneurysm had set in, which was close to rupture, and the walls of my aorta had worn paper thin and were again about to rupture. And I remember the doc coming in. You asked about prognosis. The doc coming in at the time, and it wasn't my cardiologist, it was a cardiothoracic surgeon, who basically said, listen, your chances of going home and going to bed tonight and waking up tomorrow are less than you going home, going to bed, and never seeing tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And at that point, surgery was imminent. And that's when the whole thing took place. That's when it all started.
So you had your surgery, and we've watched the documentary, which was fantastic, by the way. It was, I kept going from tears of joy to tears of sorrow to not sure what to think next, but it was...
we did our job, hopefully.
You did. It was amazing.
Exactly what we wanted you to do.
It was great. And I remember seeing in there, you come out of, obviously you explain your story somewhat there, and thank you for filling in the details here. But 13 months after that surgery, you completed an Ironman, and you did it. We know that it was past the time cutoff. Tell us about that experience of getting into the training for a full distance Ironman following the surgery. And obviously, my guess is that the doctors are probably looking at you like you were crazy, along with friends and family.
It's a crazy story. It really is. So I'll start by saying that training began as I was being wheeled into the operating room. And that's kind of a funny thing to say, but as I laid out a little bit in the documentary, the most impactful moment of my life was being wheeled into that operating room and asking myself, what's your legacy? And I had two small kids, two little girls at the time. They're now much older, teenagers. But at the time, what footprints have I left in the sands of time for them to follow in? And I knew that I had been a good dad, but what impression have I really left for them? What legacy have I left for them? And I didn't have that answer. It was the darkest moment of my life as well as the most impactful. And when I got out of surgery, which, was the perfect storm, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And I realized really how lucky I was to even be alive. I remember those thoughts, and they popped back into me. And I thought, the only way I really know how to do this is through sport. And sports had been such an impactful part of my life, my entire life, and the metaphor of what it has given me, from how to lose, how to win, hard work, teamwork, dedication, all of all of those metaphors that sports gives you as a way to live your life, that is ultimately what I went back to as a way to start living my legacy to my kids, as opposed to leaving a legacy. And with that, I thought, what's the most outrageous thing out there that I wanted to do that I never thought I'd be able to do? Before I even knew this, I had a heart problem, and the Ironman triathlon was it. I mean, that to me was the epic pinnacle, thing out there that for so many, including myself, thought was unachievable. So I remember when my doc came in, sitting down with her and my wife saying, I'm signing up for Ironman, and it's in 13 months. And my doc took it better than my wife. And my wife looked at me and said, you really need to talk to the doc about this. And I looked at her and said, I am right now. And she goes, no, you need a psychiatrist to talk to. And my doctor, who just was one of the most, and remains a dear friend of mine, and was one of the most fantastic bedside manner physicians I'd ever encountered, looked at me and said, as long as you manage your inner knucklehead, I'll work with you on this. And she said, that inner knucklehead is going to tell you to push when I'm going to tell you to, not to. I'm going to give you some limitations. We're going to do more tests. We're going to figure out what boundaries you can work within to achieve this goal. And if you stick with me, I will help you, and it should be okay. So we began this process, and she did give me some pretty strict limitations on what I could do, and off I went. So Seattle Marathon was first, which was 6 months after surgery, and I did the half. And then 7 months after that, or 13 months post-surgery, my toes were in the sand at Coeur d'Alene for Ironman. That was back in 2006. So that was the first one.
Wow. I know people are now probably curious, if you haven't known an athlete with cardiac issues or haven't met one yourself. When you talk about restrictions, what kind of restrictions? Do you remember specifically any of the ones you had along the way, and how that progressed as you were able to train better and further? Yeah.
So, there's a big difference between, what's now kind of termed as high intensity interval training and low intensity steady state. And for me, I don't do well with high intensity interval training, basically because my heart rate gets jacked up too high, and I'm on enough medication in the mornings to call it breakfast, which really does make an impact on what my heart is doing, and when those meds really kick in, and essentially can start shutting me down. So for me, it was really about managing my heart rate. And so 160 beats per minute was my limit, and remains my limit today. So as long as I keep my heart rate under 160 beats per minute, which really isn't that hard to do, if you do it right. I don't, to be honest, in full disclosure, I don't even wear a heart rate monitor anymore. I can probably tell you what my heart rate is right now without even wearing any device. I know it. I am so in tune with my body. It's sick. But it took a lot of time to get there and really work within those limits. So what that really meant for me, not a problem swimming, although I had a lot of work to do to build up my swim to be able to do it. That was by far the hardest thing for me to learn. But once I did, heart rate wasn't an issue there. Heart rate was on hills on the bike and hills on the run. And so what that meant for me was knowing that, look, I'm not going to podium here. I'm out here to try to, use Ironman as this bigger thing than just a race. And getting past, I've been passed by, the 70-year-old nuns and the guys with no eyes, that are out there doing it, and the people, missing limbs. And And it's great. I smile, I cheer them on, and I realize that if my heart rate's getting up, it means I'm slowing it down. And that's exactly what I do. It's about something, to me, much bigger than a PR or much bigger than a podium or anything like that. It's about using sport as a way to live your life.
So I would say it sounds like you have an advantage, at least psychologically and emotionally, and I work with a lot of athletes going into these competitions, and they struggle with the butterflies and the fears and the worries, and someone's faster than me, and I should be racing. And for you, it sounds like you're able to push that aside and look at this sport in a different way. I mean, do you see that with other cardiac athletes? Do you feel like sometimes you almost have an advantage?
Interesting. Do we have an advantage? I would say I don't think I would call it an advantage.
Yeah.
I think the perspective. I think that we have a different perspective, and certainly not all. I mean, the IronHeart Foundation now, we have maybe 2,800 athletes, most of which have complex cardiac abnormalities all over the world that vary. Some are still very driven toward identifying sport as the success of sport by PRs and by hitting that podium or doing whatever. I'd say they're in the norm. The majority do fall into a little bit more of the perspective that I share, which is, when you're out there, whatever type of an endurance event you're doing, whether it's an ultra or an Ironman or a triathlon or a 5K, 10K marathon, whatever it is, that it's about really enjoying the moment of where you're at and what it's given you and what it's taken you to get there. And if you can get that kind of perspective and take out all of that other trash and garbage that is just burying your brain, it's all trash. It really is. And you can just focus on this perspective of the privilege of being where you're at and what you're able to do, then it's amazing at the things that can happen. And I think even those that can get there find that the results that they may be striving for, those come as well once they can take out all that garbage.
Right. And to me, and I like the way you put that, because to me, that feels, maybe advantage is not the right word, but a strength that you can tactically and emotionally, you're dealing with that. You've already dealt with that. And, Ironman is what we always say, it's probably 95% mental. So you've kind of already won that game when you hit the start line.
Yeah. And I work with athletes as well. And it's the same thing. It's that, most of the people that I work with, I look at and the first thing I tell them is, look, you easily, any day of the week, you would beat me in any distance race out there, period. So your ability, your physical ability to do what this is that you're wanting to do, it's already there. It's what's upstairs. It's what's in your brain that may be preventing you. And so we work with that, and I'm working with a guy right now who's training for his first Ironman. He's doing Arizona this November, and he has panic attacks in the water. Very common, right? Very common thing. And so I'm working with him out at a local lake, and we spend 45 minutes sitting in the water, floating and talking, and then maybe 20 minutes actually swimming. And it's just getting his mind right and trying to take out all of those things, those distractions that are flooding his mind when he's in the water. And that, to me, it's again, it goes back to perspective. When you can just focus on really why you're there and what you're doing. And look, we all have reasons why we race, every one of us. And we all have issues that we're faced with, whether they're as out in the public as mine, or they're very, internal. We all have stuff that we're going through. And there's reasons why we are doing what we're doing. I mean, Ironman to me is, I don't know a person who does Ironman unless they're a pro that is doing Ironman that doesn't have something deep inside of them that is lighting that fire in them to do it. And when you're distracted by all of that other garbage, you lose sight and you lose perspective of what really is burning inside of you to make you do what you're doing.
Along the way, you mentioned obviously doing the first half marathon, the Ironman 13 months later. Along the way, you began to connect with other athletes that shared similarities to your story. How did that come about, where you were able to connect with people that had a similar background?
Yeah, great question. So, I'm privileged to have a phenomenal family and wonderful friends that were quite supportive throughout this ordeal that we all went through. And I tell people today, as I'm telling you, that my wife went through worse than I did, because I was lucky enough to sleep through all of the stuff that went down. She was right there watching it all happen. And I saw my parents and my wife and my friends, and the support that they gave me afterward was incredible, but it wasn't enough. And I felt this big emotional gap in my recovery, and really came to realize that what I really needed was that sense of belongingness. I had love, but I needed that sense of belongingness, those core needs that we all have. And in wanting to feel like I belonged, I needed to really reach out and see if there were others like me that were doing endurance events that had gone through similar issues. And so it was late nights, getting familiar with Facebook and Twitter and all this social media stuff that is out there. I still don't know a hashtag from a @ sign.
But whatever. You're good at cyber stalking, it sounds like.
Right, but I'm good at reading newspaper articles and eventually cyber stalking. And Facebook became my best friend, because I'd read a story. I do a Google search and read about some guy in the Midwest who went through this, and there was an article written on him. I'd find him on Facebook, and I'd say, we need to talk. And that was basically all I would say is, we need to talk. Here's my information. And slowly but surely, people would reach out and almost instantly. I mean, this was really within a month after surgery, I was starting to connect with these other cardiac patients that had gone through similar circumstances, that were out there doing, whatever events they were doing. It just so happened at the time, a lot of them were triathlon focused and really Ironman focused, but it's long since, expanded way beyond that. And decided to, well, let's form a team, and let's form a virtual team. And that virtual team has eventually evolved into now a full, 501c nonprofit organization, the IronHeart Foundation. And now we've got folks in like 49 states and 22 countries now, I believe.
Wow.
So of people just all with this shared, these two things that they share in common that have brought this community together, and that's heart disease and sport, specifically endurance sport. And so now, we work a lot with sports cardiologists like the one that eventually figured me out. There's not many of them out there, but those that are, we hold them very near and dear to our hearts, no pun intended, because people are asking the same questions that I asked, years ago, and now we have resources for them. We know where to send them. We know where you're not going to be an anomaly. And we work with them every day. We're referring cardiac patients with athletic aspirations to doctors, cardiologists who understand the heart and who understand athletes. And we're building our community and getting people connected and sharing their stories to help, really help inspire others to get out there and to keep moving and doing what you love.
Part of that project, I believe, also includes the cardiac sports medicine directory, as you mentioned, for people to be able to look up on your website. And that started basically, as I understand it, from trying to find doctors that are willing to work with athletes. Because I imagine it's not always an easy thing to find. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of liability, maybe they feel like, and they don't want to be responsible for anything that might go wrong. But at the same time, what a difference someone can make like they did in your situation. So I guess what's the status of the directory right now? How many people have you been able to hook up through it, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, so we're hooking up. The directory has been something that has been provided for quite a while, although it hasn't been public. It's been something that I keep very close to myself because of a lot of sensitivity of medical information and what people are wanting to share and willing to share. So typically, what happens is and this was what I was doing right before we got on the line here. Somebody is looking for a doctor in the Philly area. I'm getting their history. They provide me with a summary. I usually pare that down, and then the docs that we have in our network, in the IronHeart Medical Network, I then hit them all up saying, okay, we've got a 36-year-old male diagnosed with XYZ. These are his symptoms. His surgery date was this. His current providers is this. This is what he's being told. This is what he wants to do. He's looking for a second opinion, or he's looking for a sports cardiologist in the greater Philadelphia area. And I use that network to help identify who they know, if it's not one of them, that would be willing to see them. And then IronHeart typically works with that physician's office to help navigate getting in for an appointment. If there's a long waiting list, some we're able to kind of bypass and get in under special circumstances. Not always the case, but sometimes the case. So that's been going on for quite a while. And on average, I'd say, for the last decade, we've been doing about probably three of those a week are coming in. So I don't know, do the math on that.
Right. That's plenty over the years, certainly.
The number's up there. So we just decided this year, two things that are kind of new are going to be new with the foundation. One is that we're going to go public with our directory. And I was lucky enough to speak at the sports cardiology conference. It was put on through the American College of Cardiology in Utah just last month, and all of those sports cardiologists were gathered in one spot. It was great. So able to make a lot of connections there with folks that we have either been referring to, whether they knew it or not, or that have been kind of on the periphery of what we're doing, or that have been actually quite involved in IronHeart throughout our entire process. And we're building that directory out. So we hope to have that live on the website probably by the end of this year or early part of January of 2018. But until then, it's still very live and kicking. So if folks are out there and they're looking for a doc, or they're having questions about their heart, I'd encourage them to get on the website and send an inquiry in, and we can help them out. The other thing that we're doing is we're kind of switching the foundation to kind of the next phase, where we're gonna start the first of the year. Really, not even. We're starting this year with a scholarship foundation, kind of a subset of IronHeart for kids that have undergone kind of a struggle with cardiac disease, that have used sport as a way to kind of get their life back, and are moving on into college, whether they're going on to play a sport in college, or whether they're going to just be active and use academics as a way to advance their life as well. We want to give back to them. So the IronHeart Foundation now will be focused at the funds coming in, going right back out to provide scholarships for these kids.
That's a really fantastic services you've been providing through the IronHeart Foundation. And I know that you established that a few years ago, and obviously you did the documentary that was released last year in 2016, and that chronicles stories that are really a few years old. I think you were doing, was it the 2011 races?
That was 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, what kind of prompted you to go ahead and make a documentary about that journey?
I got sick of us all saying the same thing, which was, I wish we would have filmed this when I was going through it. I wish I would have taken videos or photos of surgery and I wish I had those to look back on. And the wonderful thing about the community that we built is we've got all walks of life. We've got, people in marketing. We have people in film. We have lawyers. We have physicians. We have accountants. We have, you name it. I mean, it's all walks of life that are part of IronHeart. And I just kind of remember sitting back and taking a deep breath and realizing that we've got all these resources here. Why are we saying it's too late to do that? Let's do it. We have a story to tell. And I do not come from a film background at all. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. Not a clue. Never even held a big old camera in my hands before. Never dealt with any editing software, nothing. But we had people around us and that we surrounded ourselves with at IronHeart that knew what they were doing. And so we began the process of identifying, which members we thought would tell, have a good story and that would hit maybe different audience types out there. And, we narrowed that down to about 8 or 9 at the time. We filmed a few more that unfortunately had to end up getting edited out. That's always the tough part. But off we went, and we basically filmed everybody for a year, getting ready to do one particular race. The thing that I like to tell people is that you think doing it and you think getting through heart surgery is tough. Try doing it and then doing an Ironman. You think that's tough. Try filming a movie about Ironman, and you think that's tough. Try editing that film about Ironman, and if you think that that's tough, try getting it distributed. So each step that we've taken along the way has been a huge learning curve, and each one is an endurance race in and of itself, no doubt. Mm-hmm. I think we ended with something like. I won't exaggerate that. I think we ended with about 400 hours of footage that we needed to condense down into an hour and a half. 400 hours. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to edit. But we knew people that did. The music in the film came from this phenomenal band called Cloud Cult that the leader of that band and the guy on vocals, and he and his wife both lost a child to congenital heart defect. He later found out he had one himself. And our principal of photography and videography, heart condition himself. Everybody that we tried to tie into the film, we wanted them to have some connection into what it was that we were trying to do. And as you saw the film isn't necessarily about Ironman. It's there. That's kind of the crux behind it. But it's really about these stories of people and what they're doing. So we hope that it's not a film just for triathletes, but a film for a much larger population that may get some little nugget out of it.
No, I think that was accomplished. I definitely agree. Ironman was sort of the setting. It really was about the people and what they were going through and the relationships that you had there. And I recall one of the folks that you followed through the film, she says, so at one point, she says, "You're always a patient." Yeah. And, it made me think, when she said that, it really kind of hit home, and it made me realize that, cardiac athletes, especially endurance athletes, you really have a unique set of challenges. Could you talk a little bit about that? Obviously, you mentioned, limiting your heart rate, but, what other things kind of become obstacles that say, myself, not a cardiac athlete, I don't have to deal with?
There's a lot of darkness that comes with what we've gone through, and many end up with some form of PTSD, Many have problems sleeping. Many can't get out of their head the fact that they are always a patient. Many end up spending a lot of the rest of their life essentially walking on eggshells. These are all real things that we've all faced, and I certainly have faced. The kind of residual nightmares that follow, the thoughts. I don't go a day without the last thing I think of before I go to sleep, and the first thing I think of when I wake up being my heart. And is it okay today? And how am I doing? And how's it feel? This is what I think of. I listen to my heart beat. That's what puts me to sleep at night. And that's what keeps me up at night. When I wake up, it's the same thing. It sits with you. It's always lingering, this kind of this darkness that sits there. Ellen's comment, that was a hard concept for Ellen in the film to come to terms with. And that's a hard lesson for so many of the people that we deal with at IronHeart to deal with, which is, just because you had a procedure and you're so-called cleared right now doesn't mean that you're cured, that you are always going to be a patient. And the importance of really listening to your body and not letting your mind play tricks on you, which it will, and to kind of get through the psychology of it, of your mindset. It's always something that is there, always something that's there. And it's one of the hardest things, especially for people with athletic backgrounds who are discover they have a problem in adulthood, to come to terms with as an athlete, that it's always there. And how do you manage that? It's a juggle, no doubt about it.
Certainly. And if there's somebody out there listening that does have a heart condition and maybe an athletic background, maybe just diagnosed with this, as you point out in the movie, I mean, this affects so many people. I believe it's 1 in 3 Americans now. So it's not uncommon even for people with an athletic background to discover something wrong. And outside of obviously connecting with you and the folks at IronHeart, but what are some things that you found through your own experience and the experiences of others you've connected with that would be good for someone to think about, I guess, if they were first diagnosed, or for friends and family of somebody who's just been diagnosed?
Well, I think it starts with just a basic education of heart disease. And I would certainly want your viewers to know that heart disease isn't just limited to those that have brought it on themselves through their lifestyle. When we talk about 1 in 3 and we talk about it being the leading cause of death, there's a good chunk of that which comes from lifestyle choices. But the fact is, it's still, when you look at congenital deaths, it's the number one cause of death. When you look at defects worldwide, it's the number one defect worldwide. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if you go and lead an active lifestyle that you're going to be absent of heart disease. Look at Bob, what's his name? Bob, the trainer on The Biggest Loser, who just had a near fatal heart attack, who's one of the most healthy guys out there, and his face all over television with The Biggest Loser. I mean, these things, a lot of it we've learned is genetic. And I think there's a stigma placed on heart disease that other horrific diseases, say cancer, doesn't have. When I still, people look at me if I'm without a shirt and they see a scar, they're like, "You're too young. You're in too good of shape. You're too young to have had heart surgery." They don't get it. This is something that can. I was in my 30s and in excellent shape at the time, with very little family history of heart disease, and it hit me. It struck me then. It can hit you at any time, and that's kind of the first thing. So it's not like it's not necessarily something that you brought on yourself. So that's, I think, coming to terms, number one. And number two is that if you have been recently diagnosed, if you have, been told that there's a problem, the importance of working with your physician or working with a physician that understands not only your disease, but you as a person. I can't stress that enough. And what that's done for me and so many others at getting folks connected with medical providers that understand the disease, are experts in treating the disease, but also in treating people with goals such as what you may have. And in the endurance community, it's sports. So finding docs that can really balance that out and working with them. And we're here as a resource. And I think lastly, I would say is that you're certainly not alone. And that's an important, that was an important thing for me to realize. And it took a little time to identify that. But once I did, the floodgates opened, and we saw so many people coming to IronHeart that had these amazing stories, and a lot of them are published on the website that, mine may not resonate with you, but somebody else may. And we want those stories told, and we want you to know that they're not just out there as a way to kind of have a cathartic way for patients to get everything out on paper and publish. It's really for a way to connect with other people and to let other people know that, hey, look at this person diagnosed similar to you or similar circumstance to you. You never know what's going to connect somebody in. And I think just that message of you're not alone, there's other people out there like you going through what you're going through is important to know.
It's really great, the emphasis that you place on finding a doctor, someone who understands you and can work with you and kind of gets it. And lately, I was just at a conference where we had one of the topics was talking about athletes who are fit but unhealthy. So from the outside, they look like they could be on a magazine cover or standing on the Ironman podium, but inside, maybe a time bomb, and not being afraid of working with a doctor, making sure that you are healthy, you truly are healthy underneath all that fitness, and not being afraid of life on the other side of it, if that's the case.
Yeah, and I am a big advocate for anybody getting into an endurance event, and you can really define what endurance event means, but I would say really above a 5K and beyond. And even a 5K, any level of activity, it's good to go in and get screened. And there are so many screening programs out there right now, which are very, cost sensitive, that are in our communities. And again, we have a resource of those for anybody that needs them to go in and get screened, or go to your doctor and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you think about an EKG and an echo? And let's see, let's just make sure that my most vital organ is looking okay before I, take this stuff on and endure.
What are some ways for those of us that are not suffering with cardiac issues ourselves and maybe don't even know anybody, but what are some ways we can plug in and get involved, support the work you're doing, and support the community of athletes that are dealing with heart disease?
Well, our website is filled with lots of useful nuggets and tools. Obviously, as a nonprofit, we rely heavily on funds, and everything is, of course, tax deductible. So all that's available on our website. We also have a number of people out there that have set up fundraising pages. All can be visible through the website as well, or can be found on CrowdRise that are doing some pretty amazing things and fundraising along the way. We've got one guy right now who's out there hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. A guy named John Colker. He's done the south end. He's headed to Maine, and now he's working Maine back south to his home. And he's been at it all summer long, raising money and awareness for IronHeart along the way. We've got a kid in Chicago, young boy who decided to have his birthday party. He wanted to go and do like a ninja warrior thing for his birthday party at a gym, and instead of presents, he raised money for IronHeart. And I mean, there's lots of awesome stories out there of what people are doing and how they can get involved. But yeah, I would welcome you. And I would also challenge you that you don't know somebody. If you say you don't know somebody with heart disease, going back to your quote, it's one of three. I'm guessing that you could go home and make a couple of phone calls and within 5 minutes know that you are closely connected with somebody with heart disease.
Right. I'm sure it's something that often hides out in the community. Sometimes people may not be necessarily even very public with it, but the more that we can be connected and the more resources we can get to them, the better. The website is IronHeartFoundation.org. Also, the movie can be found, information at that flatline-to-finishline.com. I know it's available on Amazon Prime and some other places as well. Give us a rundown of where they can find the documentary.
So, sure, Amazon Prime or Amazon, it's there now. We just launched on iTunes, which is great. So it's available there. It's available on YouTube for video on demand. I think those are the big ones right now, and Google Play as well. So more to come, hopefully, but right now that's a start.
Awesome. And all those places listed at flatline-to-finishline.com. Also follow the IronHeart Foundation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. David Watkins, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Our thanks again to David Watkins of the IronHeart Foundation. And keep those recommendations coming. Let us know who you'd like to get on the show, and we will track them down. Go to the ends of the earth if we have to get them on the show so that you can hear from them and we can benefit from their experience. Just email us or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. Let us know who you'd like to hear, and we will do our best to make it happen. And now that you're done listening to the show, check out our friends over at Crushing Iron. They're one of their latest episodes, How to Handle the Last 30 Days Before Your Big Race. It's getting to be that time of the year where a lot of people have A races coming up, and emotions tend to rise and energy levels tend to fall when you get in that last month or so, and it's easy to give into an unplanned kind of makeshift half-ass taper. And we've all been there. Coach Robbie, Mike Tiroli break down the last 30 days on how you can make sure to stay healthy and fine-tune your fitness instead of getting soft and lazy. New episodes every Monday and Thursday. Check them out at the newly redesigned crushingiron.com. Check them out today. Follow us at losttransition.com, Facebook, and Twitter. You know where to find us, and if you listen and enjoy the show, please go and rate and review on your podcast app. It helps us reach even more triathletes out there so we can keep making better and better shows for you. We'll talk to you again soon. For Atlanta Burl, I'm Chris Gerard. Until next time, may all your transitions be smooth.